welcome back to Worship Everywhere. I'm Matt Hoffman. Really excited about today's program because we're going to be introducing Adam Zalewski. And man, this is so awesome because everybody on the worship team has a different perspective, but yet we all are a team. And there's one sound and we're worshiping one God. So anyway, welcome to Worship Everywhere, Adam.
It's great to be here. Great to be here.
Yeah, this is great. I'm excited that you're here. And this is the first time we're doing virtual too, so this is going to be good.
Yeah.
Can you just tell everybody a little bit about your background, how you got started drumming, but also just kind of a little bit about your spiritual background?
Yeah, so as far as the drumming goes, it's kind of a silly story. I was 9 years old, and I saw the movie That Thing You Do. Have you seen that movie?
Yes.
So that's the movie that kind of inspired me. I wanted to be just like, Guy Patterson in the movie.
That's awesome.
I was like, man, I got to play drums. And so I asked my parents if I could start playing, and they got me in some lessons, and it was like, that was my thing. And that's, growing up, that's what I was known for. I was always known for being the drummer. And, shortly after I started playing, I kind of grew up in a Christian home pretty much. And so I was going to like youth group, going to church and stuff. And then pretty quickly, I got involved playing on like the middle school worship band. Even for school, I went to a private school, and then also like my middle school youth group band. And so I was playing pretty much any opportunity I got. So, but yeah, so like spiritually wise, I had a very, very Christian background, grew up in a Christian home, went to a Christian school. And, my mom was always like reading the Bible to us in the morning and stuff, whether we wanted to hear it that early in the morning or not.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I've had a really good, upbringing in that respect. So, always been involved with church and things like that. And so that's kind of a little snapshot of my background.
Man, that's awesome. And then also, it always plays into what you bring to the worship team and the worship experience. Like I, for example, grew up with choirs in United Church of Christ, and we transitioned then to more of a contemporary style. And then, of course, I moved on and I, got into more like the non-denominational side. Mm-hmm. But it's all different styles of music, and it's that background really plays into what you bring.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I actually went to, Concordia University in Ann Arbor to get my bachelor's in music education. So when I went there, I was very much exposed to the more, traditional side of things and the choirs and stuff. And I think it really did like it gave me like a really newfound respect for that style and things. But there's not a whole lot of drumming for that. So
yeah. Well, let's talk about something that everybody's probably dying to hear. Tell us about your kit.
Yeah. So, honestly, I don't have like the fanciest kit in the world. My cymbals are actually probably, they cost way more than the actual drums do.
Oh yeah, that's so true.
Yeah, and so that's even what I recommend with like students I work with and stuff. It's like take 75% of your budget and put it towards the cymbals because you can always like tune a drum and make it sound pretty good, but you can't change the cymbal. If you get a cheap cymbal, it's just a cheap cymbal. So I actually play Tama Rockstars. It's like an early 2000 Tama Rockstar kit. And, I have like a 10-inch. I'm looking at it over here.
Yeah.
10-inch, 14, and 16. So I got one rack tom and then two floor toms, 22-inch kick. And then I actually have a couple custom snare drums that I kind of change out interchangeably. So one of them's 14 by 8, for that, deep
Yeah.
worship sound.
Yeah.
And then I've got another that's 14x5, just like kind of standard. And then I use pretty much all Zildjian Ks
Okay.
for my cymbals.
So that's a little darker sound, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Zildjian is not always known for the darkest of the different cymbal brands. Even like the A's are probably a little bit brighter than some of the other brands like Meinl and stuff like that. They got some stuff that's like really, really dark and trashy. But I think the Zildjians are very musical, and that's what I use here at home and also at church. My church has like a set of K customs. So.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. So drummers these day and ages, I think, have a lot more to deal with than they used to. For example, a lot of churches are running tracks. You may have a hybrid kit where it's, maybe being triggered or whatever. What are your thoughts on that, and how do you think that's changed the worship atmosphere?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that is very, it's almost like a little bit of a divisive topic, quite honestly.
It is.
And it's something that I haven't, I didn't really think it was going to be as divisive until I started getting into what I'm doing now. But there's this balance between having like a standard of musicianship and then also having, not trying to like disqualify people from being able to play. And worship God with their gifts. And so you got these, you got churches that are trying to pursue a more professional level of sound and playing and stuff. And so that automatically is going to disqualify certain musicians who, they can't play with the click, they can't play with tracks and stuff. In my opinion, I don't think it's a bad thing, because I think we need to have like a standard of musicianship that should be better than like what the world is, putting out, because we worship the King of Kings.
That's right.
And like, I don't think mediocrity is what we should be approaching, worship. But at the same time, this is going to require people to actually like, practice and work on their crafts. Right. A little bit more than a little bit more laid back worship team where maybe they're not using clicks and tracks and all that stuff. So,
right.
But yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that's a lot different than just trying to play in your, run of the mill worship team.
Yeah.
Where they just have, just using like wedge monitors still or whatever,
Yeah. Yeah. Now, in a little bit, you're going to talk about your program that you've designed to kind of help walk drummers through, I think, just how you practice, how you approach. But we'll talk more about that in a second. But you brought up the idea of practicing. Talk us through or walk us through your practice schedule. What does that look like for you at home? Are you doing rudiments? Are you playing to tracks? What are you doing?
Yeah, so it's something that is very, important, where you've got to have like a routine, and you've got to like plan things out before you do them. And so I like to write down the things that I'm actually going to do before I actually even get into the practice room, because if you're drummers out there, if you guys are listening to this, if you're anything like me, it's very easy to just kind of go in there and start jamming out and getting distracted with all the cool toys on your kit and stuff. And jamming out is not practicing.
Right.
So really like writing down a schedule of the things you want to work on, and the things that you want to work on are dependent on your goals. So like if you set certain goals, like I want to be able to play on this worship team or something like that, then you're probably going to be wanting to practice to the click a lot, and you're probably wanting to be, working on dynamics and things like that. Or maybe if you just want to get more creative, you want to be working on like rudiments or something like that. And so for me, I've been playing in worship bands so long that I mostly just work on, honestly right now I just work on rudiments and like applying them to the kit, because that's what's really fun, being able to get more creative, because the overall like song structures of worship songs only go, it only varies so much. And so
right.
I've gotten to the point where I don't have to practice that whole lot anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like really just coming up with different ideas and different combinations of rudiments and things like that is primarily what I work on. And, I might regiment it out where maybe I want to practice that rudiment on the practice pad and then bring it over to the kit. And like those are two separate things that because you want to be able to work on just the rudiment itself, the speed of it and the clarity and all that. And then once you put it on the kit, it's like totally different. It's like, man, it's like I got to start over here a little bit, even like knock down the BPM by 20 or something like that. Yeah.
No, that's so good. I think everyone who would consider themselves even an amateur musician wishes that they did the rudiments, wishes that they spend more time on the scales, because all of the creativity that you can develop comes from those abilities.
Yeah. And I think, I think the primary reason why a lot of musicians don't do those things is because, let's be honest, like they're not always the most fun thing to practice. Yeah, so you really gotta find that balance between practicing the things that are a little bit more enjoyable and then also practicing the things that are maybe less enjoyable.
Yeah.
And the ones that are less enjoyable are usually the ones that are really going to push the needle the most. So
right.
I mean, that's kind of just a discipline thing, and I think the scheduling things out and devoting a certain time frame to each thing really helps, because then you're like, okay, I only got to practice this rudiment for 10 minutes. If I can make it 10 minutes a day, that's going to be compound interest dictates is that you're going to be a lot better at that rudiment if you keep it consistent.
Yeah. 10 minutes of targeted, focused, intentional practice a day take you a lot farther than even playing a couple hours a day.
Especially if it's, if the 2 hours is just not focused, or it's like 2 hours on Monday and then you let your instrument sit for like 3 days in between. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about, what are drummers afraid of? I know there's a lot that can go wrong, especially in a live worship environment. But what are just some of the fears and some of the things that are going through drummers' minds, Sunday morning or Saturday afternoon, whenever you worship?
Yeah, I think, like we were talking about how a lot of churches are using tracks and clicks and things nowadays. And I think that is a source of a lot of fear in drummers who are not quite comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Because once you get off that track, man, it's pretty darn tough to get back on without the whole band kind of falling apart.
Yeah.
And then, especially as the drummer, because you're kind of like, everybody's somewhat listening to you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a huge fear of getting off that, getting off that click.
Yeah.
And, if they're not quite comfortable with it, they might not be able to play a lot of the cool like fills or embellishments and things. And they're like, I just got to stay straight pocket because I can't lose this click. If I lose this click, this whole thing's going to be a train wreck. And, I think
nobody wants that. Yeah, nobody wants to end up on an Instagram reel or something,
Yeah, show up on the worship fails,
Yeah.
But yeah, so absolutely, that's probably the big fear of what I talk about, and also, it's an earnest desire to not like disrupt worship,
Right.
If you mess up And a lot of times if the drummer messes up in a large way, it's extremely noticeable.
Yeah.
And that could potentially disrupt worship. And a lot of drummers, they have that great heart of wanting to not be a distraction during worship. And that's, that's probably more important than anything. It's not about like necessarily like looking foolish or anything like that. It's like you want to make sure everybody's able to worship, because that's the whole point we're playing in the first place.
Right. No, that's a great segue into something else I wanted to ask you, just your thoughts on how do you prepare spiritually, and how do you approach that performance versus leading worship mentality? How do you approach that?
Yeah, that's another one of those like divisive topics.
It is.
Like, everybody always talks about how it's not a performance. It's we're playing for an audience of one. But I kind of disagree with that, honestly, because you're kind of responsible for leading the whole church, the whole congregation in worship. And so if things are not being played well or played smoothly, it's very, very distracting to worship. And so I think that's why I think like practicing and being ready to play the songs well and things is really important. And so I think you can kind of almost look at it as not like one or the other. It's like you do the practice and you put in the time so that worship can kind of be worship. And it kind of puts like an importance on practice. Like that's why we put that time into it, so that we're not being a distraction to worship. We're not causing a train wreck or bringing people out of focus, because sometimes it is funny when the worship band totally train wrecks or something like that. Like everybody laughs and stuff, but at the same time, it's like it's bringing all those people out of worship, and then it's going to take a little bit longer to get them back to like pressing in.
Right.
So,
right.
I mean, it's kind of, just kind of one of those divisive topics.
It is. No, I appreciate your input on that, your thoughts on it. I've always looked at, so as a worship leader for, 20 something years now, I've always looked at the drummer as the heartbeat and just the critical element. How do you see, like, is there any spiritual connections that you see to playing drums? I know David talked about the loud crashing cymbals and all of that. And maybe like in like a warfare sense, do you get any of that when you're playing, or maybe something else?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's like musically, it's definitely like, a very important aspect of the band, because it's providing so much texture. And with the modern worship music these days, it's a little bit more progressive in nature, kind of like where if you go back to like the verse that you played in the beginning, the drummer is always playing something slightly different. Like it's not just kind of go back to the original beat necessarily. So I think that's something that is pretty prevalent there. And then as far as like spiritually though, like I do feel like it is kind of, it's almost like a battle cry instrument in a way.
It is.
It's like, it's just got that like, kind of almost like a war type instrument,
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah.
The drummer can really take the moment and just elevate it and rally the people. Like I think the marching band, when they're marching into war, and you got the snare and the big bass drum, and you guys have that power to just rally everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I am biased to the drums, of course, because that's, that's my main thing. Like, I do play other instruments and things,
Okay.
but I think with the role of the drummer, you've got pretty simple like chord structures and melodies inside worship music, which isn't a bad thing. It's just, I think it's making it a little bit more accessible to be able to like actually sing the songs. And so it's not going out, and doing all kinds of like 11th chords or 13ths and stuff. And so because of that, like the melodic instruments, they don't have, it's a lot harder to create that tension with those chords. You pretty much have just like the 5 chord is kind of going to offer you the most tension.
Yeah.
And so I think the drums, like it uses, like worship music uses the rhythm as like the source of the tension in the music. And so like when you're doing those like builds and all that stuff, I think that really kind of like provides that tension where people can kind of get lost in the worship.
Yeah, definitely.
So, yeah.
How are you, or do you address the idea of flowing? I know people talk about that a lot. You either pretty much buy the track, you play it as you're going to hear it on the radio, which I'm not particularly a fan of.
Yeah.
But how do you address flowing in the spirit or flowing with the worship?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's just goes back to like being comfortable with your skills, like, because it requires like a level of musicianship to be able to do that. And it does require you to kind of be, playing with people that you've kind of been playing with for a little while. It's pretty hard to do that with like a complete new, if you walk into like a brand new church and they want to go off the cuff like that. But yeah, like I'm totally in agreement with you. Like I think sometimes the tracks, if we're not able to deviate from those at all, it does feel a little bit restrictive.
Yeah.
And so I think being able to...
And predictable.
Yeah. And it's not that God can't like work through that and still, show up during a structured song. But I think a lot of times God's plans are not our plans. Like when he wants to do what he wants to do, it's not always going to be something that we thought of ahead of time, know? So I think he does often move during those a little bit more off the cuff, like improvisations and things like that. And so, I mean, it's kind of it's more of like just being really comfortable on your instrument.
Yeah.
And being able to do that. And also, praying, being prayed up.
There is that.
Coming in with, I have, coming in with the right heart and not just being like, okay, got to play these songs, It's like actually trying to be a little bit less focused on, okay, I got to play all this specific beats and specific chords and melodies and things, and more focused on like, I got to worship while I'm doing this, like I need to worship, because worship is more about us receiving things from God than us really like giving things to God, because God doesn't really need our worship. He's like fully complete without our worship. And so I think like where, it's more for us than it is for him, in my opinion, because I think he does more for us than we can ever do for him. Right.
Yeah. It's like, we're just lucky to be here,
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much, God, for just allowing us to come in your presence. Yeah. I think people don't really realize everything that happens on a stage. People see us wearing earbuds and, just think that it's so we can hear each other, but there's so much going on. Even as a worship leader, you're thinking about cues, you're thinking about what is the Spirit saying? Are we going to go back over the chorus, or all these things? And there's so much to think about. How are you interacting with each other? Where's the Spirit moving? When is the pastor? I mean, there's so much, but to to your point of just being so comfortable on your instrument, it's almost like it's just a part of you, and you can just flow with whatever's happening, whatever's coming next.
Yeah. And that's, that's why it's so important to be practicing regularly. Like, if you're just relying on, like, Tuesday night rehearsal and, maybe like a 15-minute run through on Sunday, it's just not enough to be able to, like, take part in those more unplanned, like, things that will happen, where you can actually be sensitive to that. And not just to make it just about the music. Like, it's also very much like each band member's, like, personal relationship with Christ. Like, if they're not, if the band isn't, like, in the Word on an individual level, like in the Word and praying and being regularly connected to God, it's gonna be harder for them to be, sensitive to that, the Spirit of God, when He wants to, like, do something different that we haven't planned for. Yeah, and it's not to say that, God can't use a musician who's maybe not up to the caliber required, because I know there's been times where God, will work through me, and He'll help me play things that, I never thought I could play during some of those little bit more Spirit-led moments.
Yeah.
Where just those things come out because the Lord's working through you. But I do think, we kind of owe it, with everything God has done for us, His sacrifice, all the blessings that He pours out on us constantly, even though we don't deserve it. Like, we owe Him that much to put in the time to practice.
Man, that's so good.
And get to the place where we can actually, like, kind of play, flow, like you were talking about, flow in the Spirit, and kind of go off, maybe the plan or what have you.
Yeah, I always call it getting off the page. Like, learn the song, learn the elements, how everything's flow in and out from each other, but then forget about, like, be able to get off the page and interact with God and interact with each other. Yeah. For most people, it's like, hey, I just want to play. I want to get in. I'll play anywhere, and they don't really approach it from that spiritual side, and really preparing yourself. So
yeah, and that's the whole point. It's like, I've played at churches where they hire musicians out, from outside, and they're not even believers. Like,
what's up with that?
They just hire them because they can actually play well. But it's like, man, if that's the case, like, we can't even pull from the pool of Christians we have. Like, why?
Yeah, I know.
I don't know. It's almost like, because I don't know, the gospel is such a great thing where it kind of, like, takes off all the pressure, as far as, like, we don't have to do, we don't have to, not sin. We don't have to act right. Like, God's going to forgive us either way. And so I think that kind of, like, pervades other areas where it's like, okay, now we don't have to be, like, the greatest band in the world because, we have the Lord and stuff. But I just don't want it to be, like, using the gospel as a reason to be lazy,
Yeah.
Because I think that's what happens.
So true.
I think that's what happens a lot. And that's kind of worrisome.
It is. It can be.
And I think like, we should be leading in the areas of, like, arts and worship, or arts and music and things like that, not the world, Like, secular bands tend to be a lot more proficient than Christian bands. I mean, that might be just a overgeneralization, but it's kind of the perception of most people. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm kind of in line with you. I always felt like we have the most important message on the planet that the planet will ever hear. Yeah. And we owe it to Him, and we owe it to people to make that excellent, whether it's the sound or whether it's preparing your heart. Like, you're actually kind of an instrument, figuratively speaking.
Yeah.
So, yeah, what are you doing to really be the best that you can be? And I always thought the whole grace thing was a cop out, like, oh, we got grace, so I can do whatever. And, we'll pray up on Saturday night or whatever. I think it's like you're saying, you have to put the practice time in during the week so that you're ready. You have to put the spiritual time in so that you're ready.
Yeah. And it's not that, like, I think, I don't want to like overgeneralize, but I think the grace is applying to like salvation. It's not always like, okay, God's going to give me grace and help me play like a pro, even though I put like zero time in.
Exactly.
But
That's so good. So I wanted to kind of transition a little bit because you have an incredible program that you've developed. Can you just tell us what that is, what it's about, what it's designed to do?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much all the things we've been talking about, tracks and clicks and being able to flow and things, like all of these different things that are, a lot of these things are like the tracks and the clicks and things are kind of like newer things that worship bands are doing nowadays. Mm-hmm. And if you're not up to par to be able to like do that, it does disqualify you from kind of playing in the band until you can kind of like develop that. And so that's kind of how my program was kind of birthed, because I saw so many drummers, they want to serve, they want to worship God with their gifts, but maybe they're just not quite ready to do that yet. And I just didn't think, I think there's a need there for training in this area. And and on top of that, it's like we're talking about flowing in the Spirit and being comfortable on your instrument. And the only way that can happen is if you're extremely comfortable with, playing and being well versed in drumming or whatever instrument you're playing. And so that's kind of the overarching goal of my program, is to get drummers to that place so that they're able to flow in the Spirit, play, off the cuff, be really comfortable to kind of do what is needed for the band, for the church. And it's kind of like a twofold thing, where if a drummer can't do those things and he's not comfortable with the click, he's not comfortable with the tracks or whatever, it's a twofold thing. Like, number one, it's going to be harder to lead the church in worship.
Yeah.
But on top of that, they're inside their head the whole time, like, oh shoot, I got this bridge coming up, I forget the beat for that, and then maybe you play like the tom groove from the song before it that belonged to this one, and it's like, and then before you know it, they're more focused on themselves and their own shortcomings than they are like worshiping God. And so that's the whole reason I've created this program, to help drummers like not only play drums well, but also worship while they're playing. And the only way you can do that is to get really comfortable with the skills required, playing to a click, practice routine, being able to like really focus and get things done without having to spend hours and hours on all of these songs, because let's be honest, most people have full-time jobs. They're not getting paid to play at church. So and people have families and work obligations. And so my program is designed to come in and help these drummers, give them the exact path of the things they need to practice to get to that really confident place. And so that's kind of the summary of how it was born.
And then the name, Drummers Who Worship.
Yeah, that's
so awesome, because people don't look at they don't even necessarily expect the drummer to worship. They're looking at the guy in front thinking he's the guy that we need to follow. But the way you're talking about this, I love the interaction, the spiritual element of it.
Yeah, and that's actually like my Facebook group on Facebook. And that's, that's a free Facebook group that anybody can join who plays or has like a desire to play for their church. And because it's not just about the drumming, it's about the worship, that's the most important part of it. I mean, my actual program is called Complete Worship Drummer. So the hopes in that, going through the training, getting the coaching from me, you'll become a more complete worship drummer where you're not just a good drummer, but you're also worshiping the Lord while you're playing.
Yeah. How do people find out more? Where do they go to get information? How do they contact you?
Yeah, I mean, the best way to, find out more is, go to my Facebook group, Drummers Who Worship, and you'll find out more there. You can find examples of my, teaching style, have video tutorials in there, like a lot of free trainings and things. And it's also just a great place to fellowship with other drummers from all over, pretty much all over the world. And then on top of that, my website is www.completeworshipdrummer.com, and you can get to know a little bit more there, and you actually have an opportunity to speak with me if you want to.
That's awesome. That's great. So at this point in the interview, normally what I would do is I'd say, hey, let's play a song together. But given the distance and all of that, I think what I'd like for you to do is just take a minute and speak to the drummers out there. And what would you say to encourage the drummers out there?
Yeah, I would say, don't, a lot of drummers can kind of look at, the tracks and the clicks like in kind of this negative light where maybe you feel like, well, is it necessary? But I don't think that's reason to just kind of like give up or not keep like pursuing your skills. So keep working on your skills, and it's worth it because we're worshiping the King of Kings. Yeah. And I just want to encourage you that you can do this. You can get to that place where you can play confidently. If you're not at that place right now, you can get there, and you kind of have to start to believe that is true before you're going to get there. Because if you don't believe that you can get there, then it's going to be, you're kind of defeating yourself before you even start. Yeah. So just keep working on your skills. And if you need help, I know a guy who might be able to help you.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Adam, for joining us today. Complete Drummer, go on Facebook, Drummers Who Worship. So awesome. And I think we're going to probably do this again. You've got so much good things to say. You have so many good things to say that people need to hear.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you for doing what you're doing. We bless you, honor you.
All right. Thanks a lot for having me, man. God bless you.
God bless.